I've been getting a lot of questions lately in the comments about the Jeep. What's the status? Did I give up on it? Where is it? Which means some of you haven't been following the saga of the Magnaband. I needed a sheet metal brake to keep making progress on the Jeep, and this thing took me about 5 months longer than I thought it would. So if you haven't seen those videos, I'll leave a link up there. And if you did see those videos, you'll know in the last one I said I was planning on this being one video and then decided to split it into two. So by way of a really awkward transition, let's jump into working on the Jeep. I think the best way to show what this thing's capable of is to do what I made it for and make some parts for the Jeep. The floor pan that's missing here has a flange along the side that's bent down. That should be no problem to make. Since this is a new tool to me, one of the other things I want to do is kind of keep an eye on the temperatures. For that, I'm using this thermal camera. This is a Topdon TC005. Topdon sent this to me to try out. Figured this would be a good test for it. Now it gets a little more interesting because we need to make this bend. Unlike a normal box, like you would do in a box brake or pan brake, instead of folding everything up, this actually folds the opposite direction of that flange. And on top of that, this is actually a radius rather than just a hard edge. So what I can do is hang the first bend over the edge, and then use a piece of round bar to bend the radius. So really, with the time it takes to set up, cut metal, etc., seeing a pretty minimal amount of heating. So I don't think the duty cycle is really going to be an issue at all with this thing. So as someone who uses tools and cameras, I would say this thing falls more into the category of tool than camera. It feels pretty reasonably well built, and it feels more geared toward functionality, finding the hot spots or cold spots, rather than, let's say, high definition. The resolution on the infrared camera is 256 by 192 and has a 2 megapixel visible light camera, which in 2023 seems like kind of an odd selling point. But what it does is it allows a sort of overlay mode or picture-in-picture mode. I can see how sometimes on the thermal image it's tough to pinpoint exactly what you're looking at, so it's a neat little feature on it. My one complaint with it is I would say the instructions that come with it are less than adequate. Took me a while to figure out that to get into the menu, it's just the center button. But other than that, this thing's gonna be handy to have around the shop. I'm gonna do a little work rough fitting these things for now. I want to get rid of this brace. I'm gonna replace it. It's more or less the same deal on this side. I am going to try to salvage this brace, so I had to do a little bit more fitting. It's a very, very rough fit, basically just enough to get the panels in there so I can actually start fitting things. I think the next thing is to get the transmission cover back on. I patched this thing up off camera before I even started on the body, which is why I didn't show it. So now it's just kind of a process of fitting it up, figuring out what's interfering, and slowly working away the metal that I don't need. A bit more fitting, and I'm pretty happy with how that all came together. I think the next thing to do is having everything screwed together tightly should give it a good bit more structure, so I won't need as many clamps to move on. Now for the part I really haven't been looking forward to, I need to splice and patch what was left of the original transmission tunnel back in. First thing I'm going to do is clean it up as much as I can and cut it back to good metal. And there's not much left of it now. Well, I think that'll be close enough for what I need. Well, it looks the part, but it came out way too shallow, so I'm going to kind of pound this back out and try again. No sense in wasting more metal until I can figure out how to actually do it. I'm going to say second time's the charm on that one. It'll pull together. And as I did before, every surface that I won't be able to paint later on is getting a coat of weld-through primer on it. I'm taking a strategy of skipping back and forth between welding and spot welding to keep both the metal and the spot welder from getting too hot. I also thought it would be interesting to use the thermal camera to see how far the heat was traveling while I was welding, so I used the overlay mode for this shot. And after a whole bunch more of the same, I've got both sides in, got all of my weld nuts welded on. I replaced this brace. I bought this one. It's kind of a complicated part to make. Before I weld the center section in, I want to figure out where all of the bracing goes. I don't have a whole lot to work off of here, but I think it'll be enough to work it out. I went ahead and marked in the outside of the frame rails, which is the dotted line, and best guess on where my body mounts are, and then just kind of simplified this so I don't have to deal with trying to bend these things. There is another piece that comes out over this bracket, but we'll figure that one out later. I can reach about 18 inches with the spot welder, so I want to figure out if I'm better off spot welding this bracing in on the sides before I weld the center section in, or if it doesn't really matter. So the black line here is a pretty good estimation of what I can reach without that center panel in there. And then this line is what I can reach if I have to go from the transmission tunnel. Either way, I'm still going to have some plug welds to do on the outside, but I'm going to be better off doing it before I put that center section in. Went on a little bit of an odyssey on making hat channels there, but that's sort of what it's going to look like. These smaller ones came out marginally smaller than the originals. This piece of steel is what I had. It's a little bit smaller than I would have liked. It doesn't span the two magnetic poles. Even if it was another 1/4 inch bigger, it still wouldn't. So in order to bend it, I just kind of had to pack everything in with another piece behind it so it would stay in place. So kind of ran up against some limitations of the brake, and took me a little bit to figure out how to get these to come out well, but I mean, it's hat channel and bracing. It's all going to work just fine. None of the smoke and fumes here are things I want to be breathing, so I had both overhead doors open, a big fan going, and wore a respirator for as much of it as I could. The mistake in my brilliant plan here was not accounting for the fact that I can't clamp through this middle section with the clamps I have. I know Clecos exist, I just don't have any, so I went back and drilled some holes for some screws. I should have just done that first, and then I could deburr it and get everything nice and tight. But live and learn, moving on. I think once they grind these down and seam seal everything and turn the Jeep over and never look at it again, it should be fine. I did also buy this center brace, but it still required a fair amount of work to get it to fit. I probably could have made one from scratch, but for what it cost to buy one, it wasn't worth the time. And there's the result. It's hackish and amateur, but considering that I'm an amateur hack, I'm pretty happy with how that all came out. It's not perfect, but I think that this is absolutely perfectly good enough for what I want to do. First goal is to make it roadworthy and do it in a way that I can go back later and clean it up and make it look better. But I think that seems pretty solid. Let's see if we can go ahead and put this on the frame. before I drill the body mounts, I want to make sure the tub is sitting in the proper place on the frame front to back, so fenders are going back on. Well, I've got a whole lot more grinding and chasing pinholes and welding and some hammer and dolly work and probably some heat shrinking to try to tighten it up and make this look half decent. Still have a long way to go, but having this thing sitting back on its wheels even temporarily makes it feel like I'm finally starting to make progress. So if you want to see more, stick around.